Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about foods that last pretty much forever. These are things that you can put in storage, and provided that you did it the right way and it was the right conditions, you should be able to open these things up decades later and you should be perfectly fine eating them. And y'all, I'm going to kind of err on the side of caution with some of these things, let you know some caveats about storing certain items long term that maybe it won't be harmful to eat them, but there might be some things that start to lose nutritional value over time, and that's a good thing to know about. So the first food that'll last pretty much forever, actually this will last forever, is going to be salt. Salt in its most natural forms will last forever. I mean, it's a mineral, for crying out loud. Rocks don't expire. The kind of catch to that is iodized salt will not last as long. I mean, I don't think it necessarily goes bad, but the iodine in it starts to, I think, break down within like 5 years. So if you're storing iodized salt for that iodine content to be added to your diet, just know that the iodized salt and the iodine doesn't really last forever. Now, of course, the salt does. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to store salt for an extremely long period of time, just get the most pure salt that you possibly can and just put it in Mylar, seal it up. I don't think putting an oxygen absorber in there is necessary. In fact, I think it might just cause things to clump up. But point is, salt in its most natural forms should last forever. And the next food that lasts forever is sugar. When sugar's just by itself, it's not really a hospitable place for things like microorganisms to thrive. So if you just store sugar in a Mylar bag, don't even put an oxygen absorber in there, it'll last a very, very long time. The next food that lasts forever is pure vanilla extract. And y'all, it's really important that if you're wanting to store it for a long period of time, that you get pure vanilla extract, because it has alcohol in it, which, as you know, alcohol, it stores pretty much forever. So be sure to get pure vanilla extract, and of course you can add that to baking and stuff like that. The next food that lasts forever is honey. And I think pretty much all of us know about this one, but when it comes to honey, you want it to be as close to its original natural form as possible. Don't go to the grocery store and get this super refined, clear, yellow, amber-looking pasty stuff that's been processed a billion times. Don't do that. You want it to be as close to what the bees did as possible so that it'll store for the longest period of time. And, we've all heard the stories about, the Egyptian pharaoh tomb and honey, and it still being edible after 3,000 years. The only thing with honey is that, after time it does start to, crystallize and dry out. And you can get it back into, its liquid form by heating it up. But I have heard, I don't know if this is true or not, so drop it in the comments if you're smarter than me, that you don't want the temperature to exceed, I believe it's 150 degrees, because that starts to break down certain things in the honey that make it so good for you and so nutritious. Now, beyond just being able to eat honey and using it as a sweetener and all that kind of stuff, it also does have some antimicrobial properties. So if you're in a bind and you run out of triple antibiotic ointment and you have a scrape or a cut, you can put honey on that cut and it'll help prevent it from getting infected and stuff like that. Also, if you have a sore throat, this is something that I've done quite a bit. My tonsils have been giving me fits. But anyway, that's besides the point. Oop, ant, you get to die. Anyway, sorry guys, I was just out in the garden and I have a little ant on me. So if you have a sore throat or something like that honey can be added to a tea and you can drink it and it'll help soothe it, and also kind of help fight that bacteria or whatever else is back there. And also you can just, eat a spoonful of honey and it'll do the same thing, probably more effectively. The next food that will last forever is vinegar, and pretty much all the types of vinegar will remain usable indefinitely although white vinegar does the best job retaining its quality. So while apple cider vinegar is, it's usable from here on out, it might start to have changes in its appearance and other qualities, but it's still technically safe. The next food that can last pretty much forever, and this one surprised me, is powdered JellO. I did not know that until I started doing research for this video. But as long as you keep moisture away from it, so of course that means storing in Mylar and then all that kind of stuff, it'll last forever, which is pretty cool because in addition to being usable for JellO, you can also put it in drinks as kind of like a drink mix. I know that my wife she's kind of gotten into like different, like those like energy and like health teas, I think is a good way to describe those. And she lets me sip and I'm like, this is JellO powder. And of course it has other stuff in it too. But if you're somebody that likes JellO, it'll store forever. And the next food that will last forever, and this should surprise no one, is different kinds of rice, with the exception of brown rice, because the oils in it that prevent it from being good for long-term food storage, it'll go rancid. But things like white rice, wild rice, jasmine rice, those will store forever, especially if you do a good job packing them in Mylar with oxygen absorbers. Those, I mean, you can basically put those in stasis and eat them several decades from now. And they are just, I mean, they're perfectly fine. Just as good as the day that you put them in the bag, provided that you did it correctly. The next food that lasts pretty much forever is pure maple syrup. And like some of the other things that we've talked about, it needs to be pure maple syrup. Not something that us humies have got a hold of and messed with and refined it and all that junk. Nope, it needs to be pretty much the same as it was when it came from the tree. So, I mean, you can store that, use it on your pancakes, your waffles, use it as a sweetener pretty much from now on. And then kind of related to that, the next one is corn syrup. Not as many people use corn syrup, but it should last pretty much forever if stored properly. And then the next food that lasts pretty much forever is going to be cornstarch. So cornstarch a lot of times is used in things like, soup to, thicken it and things like that so that it's more filling. But when stored properly, keep it away from oxygen and moisture, light, all that kind of stuff. It'll last forever. And the next food is hard liquor. And when it comes to this, you want it to be as hard as you possibly can so it will store for as long as possible. I mean, nothing can survive in a bottle of vodka or a bottle of Everclear. Just nothing. And in addition to something that you can drink, of course, things with a high alcohol content can also be used to sterilize and sanitize different surfaces. I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that the ancient Romans, I don't think they knew why exactly, but they knew that if they used wine to clean their surgical instruments, that was a good thing to do. Now, of course, they didn't have microscopes or anything like that, like we have today, but it took us a very, very, very long time to figure out that, hey, we can use alcohol and stuff like that to sanitize surgical instruments, and it goes beyond just that too. Different kinds of alcohol, they can also be used as solvents, so that's useful, and then even as a fuel. I mean, I know you can use Everclear in something like an alcohol stove, and some of y'all might want to do other things with that stuff, but point is, it is a item that has multiple uses in a survival situation. And now we're going to be getting into the land of the caveats. These are foods that will store for decades, but they might start to lose some of their beneficial qualities after a certain period of time. And the first one of those is going to be beans. Now, we all know that beans, when stored in Mylar with oxygen absorbers and stuffed in a bucket, can last for decades, and they will. But it's also important to realize that after a certain point, they will start to lose some vitamin content, and in some cases, I think that could happen in as little as 2 or 3 years. That does not make them useless or something you should not eat and something that you should not store, because clearly you should. But it's just important to realize that after a certain period of time, they're not going to be as beneficial as they once were. They are still beneficial, but it's still worth doing things like rotating your food storage and stuff like that. And kind of similar to beans is going to be popcorn and other kinds of dried corn. I don't think all of them, but things like popcorn, they will store indefinitely. Now, I'm talking about straight popcorn kernels, not your microwave bag of Colonel Butter's Ultimate Butter popcorn or anything like that. No, this is popcorn that you like get in a jar and then you can store in Mylar like you would anything else. So just straight popcorn. It will last indefinitely, but after a couple years, it might not pop as reliably and stuff like that, but it will store forever and still remain safe, provided it is just straight, plain popcorn kernels. And the next food that will store for an extremely long period of time, and this is 25 plus years, is wheat berries. And if you don't know what wheat berries are, think of, you have your wheat plant growing out in a field, and think of what comes off the wheat plant that is ground up into flour. That's a wheat berry. So if you take your wheat berry, you put it in Mylar, oxygen absorbers, seal it up, leave it alone, it should store for 25 plus years, which is much better than flour. Once it's ground up and that process takes place, it breaks down much, much faster. So if you can get yourself a manual grinder for that, then you can store those wheat berries for decades. And another food that should store for 20 years or more, and I just did a video over this, is instant coffee, and then even some types of green coffee beans. Instant coffee, most of the time, is freeze-dried. So, I mean, us as preppers, we love freeze-dried food. And even though instant coffee might not be as tasty as what you can run down to your corner coffee store and get right now, in a pinch, you're probably going to be happy to get it, and when stored properly, can last for a very, very long time. Next food that should store for a very long period of time are different kinds of dried pasta. There's a very good reason why a lot of your long-term survival foods and your long-term food storage has a lot of noodles in it. They store for a very long time when stored properly, 20 or 30 years. And then also, I mean, they are a high energy, high calorie food, which would be useful in a survival situation. The next food is powdered milk. Under good conditions, in its original container, it should last around 20 years, maybe more. And then, of course, that brings us to the obvious, which is freeze-dried meals, which have a shelf life of 30 years or longer. I love Mountain House. The only problem with storing freeze-dried meals for an extended period of time and having enough to last you for an extended period of time is just that they are just so expensive. So where I see those fitting in is kind of a supplement to your other long-term food storage, things like, you know, your beans and your rice. And then also kind of as a backup plan, like if you're able to have something like a garden, or you're able to raise your own animals, or you live in an area where you hunt, and maybe the edible critters will not be hunted to the point of extinction if there were to be some sort of wide-scale event. That's up for debate. But anyway, those freeze-dried foods can be kind of a backup plan to your primary food storage and your ability to either grow, raise, or procure additional food sources as you go. I think food storage, it should be kind of a multi-tier, multi-level kind of thing. Where you're not just depending on having big buckets of beans. You're not just depending on your ability to be the best hunter in the world, because that's a bad idea. But no, it should have all those different elements. Like, before I did this video, I just watered my garden. That's why I had that stupid little ant on me earlier. So I have my garden, and it's not all that big, but I mean, it's not useless either. Then I have, my freeze-dried stuff. I have my stuff in my buckets. So, and there's other stuff too. I mean, I can hunt, and I have some traps, and then all that kind of junk. But point is, don't pigeonhole yourself into just one way of being able to eat if there were to be some sort of emergency, or especially a long-term disaster situation. And then there's other foods that you can kind of put together from these different ingredients that will last for a very long period of time. One of them is hardtack, and the exact shelf life of that is going to be dependent on how it was prepared, how it's stored, and stuff like that. But I mean, basically, I think it's flour, water, and salt. And I mean, once it's all baked up, I mean, it should last for a very long period of time. It's not something that you just want to munch on sitting on the couch, but you can dip it in things like soup, coffee, stuff like that. And then pemmican, which is basically beef jerky turned up to 11 pretty much. It can store much longer than like you go to the store and buy Jack Links. And I mean, it's more than just beef that's all mixed together. There's several recipes online. It's not something I've ever made, but it can store for, at least probably several months, couple years, maybe longer. You always hear this anecdotal stuff about somebody ate pemmican that was 50 years old. And that's another thing with food storage, guys. Use your best judgment. Don't eat something just because, like a YouTuber or some random blog person that you've never met said that you could eat it, or their uncle ate 50-year-old pemmican. Don't do that. Use common sense. If you want to learn more about food storage and its different levels, y'all can click here. Y'all have a good one. Thanks again.